The and there's a lot been happening in the world. It's
So
amazing,
it is
actually.
amazing, isn't it?
Uh,
I mean, where to begin? I mean, you have President Obama with that very strident defense, which I happen to agree with, of his foreign policy, and then
well, some of it was good, but I'm not sure I agree with all of it.
oh, all right, we'll have a
He said
discussion on
nothing about
that,
drones.
and then
He,
we can have a discussion of the Pope rumbling around the Middle East. That was amazing.
and then Edward Snowden's interview
Oh,
yesterday, and uh, what's the man's name? Department of State,
oh, Kerry,
Secretary of
yes,
State,
man
made
up.
a desperate attempt to ridicule him. Man up.
Yep, yep.
I'd never heard that expression before. Um, and then Putin has created a new economic bloc.
Good
Uh,
luck with that.
uh, Everybody's voting for Assad as president.
Yes, yes. No, it's unbelievable. I mean, well, you go first. What's on your mind?
Well, it's really difficult to know where to start because I mean, first thing that's amazing is that it's all there on the news,
Yes.
and it's all updated all the time, and it just keeps on coming. I mean, there was another sex scandal in India today,
Yes.
and it's going to be interesting to see how the new uh, prime minister, who's getting such a good press, despite everything that people remember about him 10 years ago. Um, it's going to be interesting to see how he deals with that.
Hmm.
Uh, Pakistan is having an increasing amount of trouble, but Nawaz Sharif went there for the inauguration, which was nice. The apparently the new Pakistan government, which has been in power now for what 11 months, nine
Yeah,
months, 10 months,
and certainly not quite a year. Yeah.
has not managed to pass a single law so far. You saw that?
I did see that.
Because of the American problem of the relationship between the two
Right.
houses.
Right. We thought our Congress was dysfunctional.
Um, and of course the European Parliament election.
Yes.
It looks as though elections just really don't work anymore, right? Because the Egyptian election is not doing what everybody wants to say it's doing. The Syrian election is not doing what everybody wants to say it's doing. The Indian election has produced a result that people aren't quite sure what to think of. The European election has created a lot of worry in Europe about what on earth anybody can do about it.
Hmm.
And I think that this is actually the theme that is mostly on my mind, that the democratic process, which we have been building in the Western world and trying to export to the rest of the world for the better part of a century now, and are so proud of, even though it hasn't been very democratic for half of that period, is working less and less well.
Well, I would take exception to that. I mean,
Yeah.
the good is often the enemy of the perfect, and I think if you keep a utopian kind of focus in mind, I would wholeheartedly agree with you. I would say that the elections in Egypt were hardly democratic. I mean, I don't know that you would. I don't think you would agree with that. But I don't think you would argue with that. Let me put it
Yeah.
like that. I think what's going on in Syria is also not necessarily a free election. But I think, for example, what happened in Europe, I think was a very good aeration of the European public sentiment right now. I think the Europeans are very nervous of the dwindling restrictions, it seems, on entry into the EU. And people come in. There are terrible refugee problems. I mean, there are small towns throughout Holland and Norway that now all of a sudden have large populations of transplants from the Sudan and other places, which in some cases have been well accepted and well dealt with and welcomed. but in other cases have transported with them their whole cultural identity, and they have not chosen to become assimilated into the host culture.
That's
So
the
I think it was a little bit of a shot across the bow of the European leaders saying, hey, wait a minute, right? I mean, maybe this is still a good idea, maybe this idea of a whole central union, but there have to be some considerations that have to be made before we completely lower the gates here.
Well, the what it actually highlights in Europe is the lack of continuity from the vote of the citizens of the EU and the political structure of decision making in the EU. Don't you think that after all, they're voting for members of parliament that are only advisory?
Right, right. No,
Uh,
it's a very big disconnect,
mm,
and it is. And I don't think the voters should be viewed as being necessarily ignorant. I think they're well aware of who they voted for, and I think it was a message kind of election. And I'm not so sure that they would have voted necessarily that way if they were voting for national leaders. I think there's a recognition that what goes on in Brussels or Strasbourg is merely advisory, and it's like, hey, wait a minute. I mean, let's send a message to these European bureaucrats.
but the news today in France is that they think that Marine Le Pen did so well in this election, maybe she'll be the next president because only 3% of the current electorate think that Hollande should stand again.
Yeah, no, I saw that. I mean, those Le Pens, her and her father are chronic, inveterate campaigners. So, I mean, one never knows.
Yeah.
I think, though, that when it comes close to a general election in France or any other place, I think cooler heads prevail. And I think there's a recognition, well, just what are we going to do here? Are we going to take a serious step to the right? Is that something France really wants to do with all that that entails, the historical and cultural baggage that that could bring? And where does that end? Sooner or later, it then begins to traipse onto the doormat of lifestyle and economics and vacation time, et cetera, et cetera. Then you have some red alerts going up.
Yeah. So uh, the um, there's so much news from so many different parts of the world that is not really being put together for us into a
Mm,
global story.
mm,
And of course, some people, I'm sure, it would be interesting to do a sociology of the news. Just exactly how many people are paying attention to what types of news? Because after all, there's been a lot about China in the news as well, and a
mm,
lot of Ukraine continues to come on. Every part of the world, including Southeast Asia, is getting into the international news, and it's not possible to put it all together into one global story.
mm.
And most people, of course, most people who read the news today didn't do geography at school, and so they don't know where most of these places are.
Right, right.
And if it's Afghanistan, they know that's a poor country, so it must be in Africa. Uh,
Yeah.
the, uh, um, so one wonders what the relationship is, in fact, between all this amazing profusion of news and global public opinion.
Well, I think that's a good question. And I think that even people such as Vladimir Putin, who is supposedly as realpolitik and expert as he is said to be, I think misread things here. I think with his strong arm tactics in the Ukraine 4 or 5 or 6 weeks ago, I mean, he was back still thinking in the old sphere of influence mentality. And I think he got his ears pinned back. And I have to take my hat off to Obama and to the West at a time when people were beginning to advocate military action, which I think would have been insane. They stepped back and they said, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to hit you economically with relatively benign steps, which forced Putin into a deal with the Chinese where the price of the gas that they're selling them is a state secret. And even Putin ruefully admitted that the Chinese are very shrewd and sharp negotiators. So he did anything he had to do to find another outlet for the gas after Europe began to back away. And now he's withdrawing the troops. He's pledged to support the newly elected Ukraine president. He has lost that round. and no American troops or Western European troops were ever put in harm's way. And I, for example, I know you want to say, but I thought Obama's speech yesterday at West Point was masterful. I mean, I thought that the out loud wondering of what in God's name are people recommending as to their projection of American military power when we can do so many other things and that should only be an absolute last resort. I
We
mean,
may have the best hammer, but not every problem is a nail.
exactly. And I think what his administration has shown time and again is that he's been able to wield a very fine hammer in order to get things done. Unpopular at the onset as they may be. I mean,
Well, I maybe, but there's a lot of things he didn't say anything about yesterday.
such
And
as,
well, the drones.
the drones are part of the fine hammer, in my
Well,
opinion.
yeah, but it's a big American investment in overseas interference,
Yes.
and it advances. I mean, America has to take a leading role, and on the one hand, he's saying that the leading role should not be with boots on the ground, but it's going to be with drones in the air
Mm-hmm.
instead, which
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that that's quite the substitute that people who don't want boots on the ground think should be.
No, I understand that. I understand that, but the use of drones in taking out terrorist leaders, I think is a
When you've got no evidence that they're terrorist leaders,
well. This it remains to be known. I don't know the answer to that. I would of course agree.
especially with the civilians that get killed with them.
Yeah, there's unfortunately an awful lot of collateral damage at times. I don't disagree with that, and I can only assume and hope and pray that the drone attacks after they're before they're approved are looked at very carefully, and there's some high degree of certainty as to the target. I don't know the answer.
Anyway, my point is that the policy underlying the good speech that he made yesterday was that it's still up to America to be the world's policeman. And
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to continue to work.
Mm-hmm.
I think that America has to be much more savvy in the way it talks and deals with other countries, especially America and Russia, but also several other countries, if America is going to continue to be a main leader in what actually goes on in the world.
Well, it's interesting because you may have touched on the issue for the next 20 or 30 years, namely the relationship of the United States to the rest of the world, and then the relationship of the United States, China, and Russia to the rest of the world. How exactly is that going to work in a time when the globalization initiatives, such as they are, essentially allow for anybody anywhere to collectively come together and express their opposition to things and actually get things done?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And as far as Russia is concerned, I wonder, and I accept your interpretation as a possible interpretation. And I was very amused today at Putin sitting at a table with journalists. I'm not sure how this came up on my screen, making some very clever comments about the Prince of Wales, comparing it to Hitler.
I missed that. I must go find it. All right.
Said, he knows the Prince of Wales, he knows the royal family in England.
Mm-hmm.
They're very well educated, very sophisticated people.
Yes.
Can't believe he really said this. Something like that. Because it's not really.
Oh, right, because Prince Charles made that remark.
Where and how this was said. Anyway, I think that the Ukraine situation, I don't really understand what Obama and Merkel, who seem to be the leaders of the Western response to it, had in their minds as they responded from day to day to what Putin was doing. But I think Putin certainly got what he wanted with Crimea, and I don't think it's over yet by any means. And I think he may be savvy enough to know that it's not the election that matters.
Mm-hmm.
It's other things.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish somebody in some reputable newspaper would have explained more about the history of the
Right.
formation of a country called Ukraine,
Right. Right.
and just exactly how long it's been that way, and what makes it a country.
Yep.
Because I think it's very uncertain how I mean, after all, we've seen how many empires over the last 500 years, starting with the Portuguese, and we've lost the Portuguese and the Spanish and the French and the
Mm-hmm.
British and the Dutch,
Mm-hmm.
and we've still got the Russian and the French,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, you're
the Russian and the Chinese. I mean, the Chinese are having problems with parts of theirs. The Uyghurs are really bothering them. And we would have thought that the Russians would have mainly had problems with the Tajiks and the Uzbeks and the Kazakhs. They seem not to be having trouble with those, and I think that the reason they're not having trouble with those is that they haven't woken up yet.
could be right.
Uh, there's not been a Kazakh Spring,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
there will be
There will
uh,
be.
in time.
There'll be a
I'm trying to work out whether I should go to Kazakhstan before the spring breaks, or wait until afterwards.
I would
Because
I would
invited
go
down there.
I would go before. It would be safer. Yeah.
Whereas there's always been problems about where the boundaries are between Russia and
Mm-hmm.
Europe,
Mm-hmm.
especially between the Russians and the Germans, and
Yeah.
that's a long history.
It's a very long history. Yeah. Yeah.
And especially cities like Odessa, um, you know, and Russia's presence on the Black Sea.
Mm. It's
It's,
relatively new.
it's not that new. I mean, it's 18th century, which
Yeah.
is much earlier than most other things that are still there. So I think that the Ukraine situation is still very uncertain. That we'll have to watch that from week to week as the long hot summer develops.
Let me ask you a question that's a little bit of a switch. Edward Snowden. I mean, I found that interview that he gave to Brian Williams at NBC to be fascinating.
Mm.
It was as if he was a true globalizationally representative citizen sitting in Moscow lamenting the fact that he couldn't go home because the Americans had taken his passport. It was like, hello, I mean, you're the most wanted man in the world. Why do you think that is? And he simply didn't understand, at least it seemed, that he had done anything wrong. He was acting for the greater good, for the world community, so that he could blow the whistle on what the United States was doing. And I mean, at first I was angry, and then I was in a state of astonishment that this guy, who's obviously intelligent, his litmus test on right or wrong was nowhere, for example, near what mine is. It was a whole different quality.
Well, right and wrong uh, maybe they're not so easy to determine as they used to be. I think there's a lot of people who agree with Edward Snowden. And did you hear Glenn Greenwald?
No. What did
Uh,
he say?
well, Glenn Greenwald is in very strong support of Snowden,
Mm-hmm.
and gave a very good commentary on everything that has happened.
Mm-hmm.
I think, uh, and he thinks that Snowden is going to wait out this regime in America and expect that something will change in the attitude towards him under the next president. Because I think that in the world generally, he has a lot of support.
He may. He may have a lot of support in the world. Yeah.
And you know, how many people who aren't in top positions themselves really want the government to have all this data and keep it secret from everybody?
Well, I think the question is who believes that the government is going to stop collecting this data just because of him? If they have
Uh,
the,
No, they won't stop collecting it, but at least it should be a little bit more transparent than it is.
Well,
And it's all he's done is make it transparent.
yeah. Well,
And no, and nobody has been able to show that he's actually done any harm.
well, it remains to be seen. I don't think you're going to see him in this country anytime real soon. Let's put it like that. So,
Maybe you'll find another passport.
well, I'm sure he'll find one from somewhere. He could end up in Cuba. That's where people seem to end up.
Uh,
So, when
Well,
finally,
I wonder whether Merkel would have disallowed, stopped his interview in Germany if Putin hadn't been causing her trouble on her eastern frontier. And she wanted to be nice to Obama to get Obama's support against Putin because of her background in Eastern Germany when Putin was in Dresden.
it could be true because remember, Snowden was possibly going to be called in front of a Bundestag
Yeah,
committee
yeah, 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 yeah,
couple of months back on the
yeah.
cell phone eavesdropping claim. Yeah. Just finally, let me ask you, what did you think of the Pope in the Middle East?
I think he's doing quite well so far. I mean, he almost made a mistake with that. That wall was a great problem.
The Wailing Wall or
Yeah,
the
yeah,
barrier wall?
he did something with the wall, the
Hmm.
Wailing Wall that some Jewish group complained about, but I can't
Right.
remember what it was now. But generally, I think it was very good. And he continues to seems to me to continue to build a very much better image of
Hmm.
this global organization,
Hmm.
one of the only truly transnational
Right.
global organizations
Right.
that we have so far.
Do you think anything would come of the Abbas Pope Francis Perez prayer meeting?
That's going to be interesting, isn't it?
It will
But
be.
we don't know yet whether Perez would agree to go.
Oh, I think he said he would.
He would, huh?
Yeah, yeah. And then, of course, the Israeli press immediately began to sotto voce say that the president doesn't have any power anyway. He's merely a figurehead. So,
Yes, and if Hamas is now going to have a joint government with Abbas, Fatah,
hmm.
maybe Hamas would be part of it as well.
Well, they should invite Hamas and Hezbollah. Why not? Get everybody. I mean, crazier things have happened. And if the Pope is basing a lot of this on the historical precedents, that's what he would do. That's the kind of things popes used to do 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. Continuities.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So, well, all right. Thank you, Professor.
See you next week.
You got a deal. Okay. Bye.
Cheers.